So hello everybody and welcome to today's webinar. We're absolutely delighted you can join us today for another webinar in the series from Vistatec. Today's webinar is of particular interest in regards to international strategy and in particular international expansion. We are delighted to be joined by Hanna from Box and Vistatec's very own Kristen Hansen. Before we get started today, I just wanted to let everybody know that we are recording today's webinar, so a full recording of the visuals and also the audio will be made available to everyone who is registered for today's webinar over the coming days. We will be having a short Q&A at the end of today's webinar, and if you're not familiar with the GoToWebinar software, you'll see in the control panel, typically on the right-hand side of your screen, about 2/3 of the way down, there's a little button that says questions. If you click that, you can simply type a question related to today's webinar. We won't be answering questions as we go through the webinar, but we will be endeavoring to answer all questions at the end in the Q&A section. If we can't get to everybody's question, we will make sure we do get to everybody after the webinar. But please don't be shy, use the question box. We love to get the interaction and we love to get your questions, and we will do our best to answer them for you as we progress today. So I'm now going to hand you over to today's hosts, Hanna from Box and Kristen, as I mentioned, from Vistatec. So Kristen, over to you.
Thank you so much, Simon, and welcome everyone. We are so happy to have you. Hanna and I will give quick introductions, and she had some fascinating research that she's put together on behalf of her company that she'll be sharing with us today. So my name is Kristen Hansen, and I have 12 years localization sales consulting as a background, and as a result, I am fortunate to have worked with some of the world's leading brands. Hanna and I are both women in localization, and we have a social media role as a result of our involvement, and that is how we met. So Hanna, thank you so much for joining me today, and I can't wait to hear what you've put together.
Yes, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to co-present with you, Kristen. Simon, thank you for the introduction. So my role at Box is product manager for localization, and what that actually means is that I focus on all localization efforts for the product team, but it happens so that at Box we don't really have a centralized globalization team. So I work a lot across teams to make sure that everyone has the data that they need to target the countries that they need. And so today I will be talking about international strategy and how to think about where to expand next. So for those of you who are listening to this and are executives, you have probably done some exercise of strategizing your next market to go to. So it will be useful to you because this is more from the international perspective. And then for those of you who are localization managers and are more used to execution and are not really, used to strategizing, this is great because this will help you elevate your position. It will also help you say no to those sales requests that ask you to add that random language, and you will be able to justify why you are adding something. So let's dive right into it. So let's say that you're just starting and maybe you have very few customers, or you don't really know what your customers look like. So the first thing that you should be starting with is with your addressable market. So addressable market is actually the sum of all of the people who have the problem that can be solved by your product. Okay, so when you think about this related to international, you should think about your market divided by regions, divided by countries, and so on. So when you think about this market, you're thinking about all these people with this problem that's solved by your product. Some people would think, okay, where countries do I expand? And the common mistakes that are made here usually is that you would look at the total population of the country and you would assume that because the country is big, then you can go into it. Well, don't make that mistake. Also, don't look at your competitors because you don't know on what factors they base their strategy. You may be looking at a competitor, but they may not know exactly what they're doing. So while some competitive research is good, I would encourage you to start from scratch on this. Okay. Then if you can't look at these factors, then what do you actually look at? And I would suggest to start by looking at the people. So first you need to define what exactly characterizes the people who would use your product, okay? Who are these people? Are these mobile users? Are these software users at all? Maybe you have a physical product. Are you selling cars? Will these people need a car? Is it customary in their country to drive a car? If it's a software product and it's on mobile, what is mobile penetration in that country? Okay, so you need to understand exactly what describes your potential customer, and that will help you to single out the countries that would have the most of these customers and where these customers will be ready to pay you. Okay, so first you focus on people. Then another thing that you should be considering is that if you're selling from the US, then you may have some legal restriction as to whether or not you can sell to certain countries. So there are embargoes, there are international treaties. For some countries it may be really easy to sell to them. For others it may not be the case. Okay. And then to narrow it down, you can actually look at where it's feasible to sell. So you'll be looking at sales opportunities in these countries. Can you actually send a sales team there? Maybe you already have a sales team in a region and they can just expand their reach. So these are some of the factors that you can look at. So then you may be wondering, where do I actually get this information? Because if, for example, if you're a small startup or if you're a localization team, then you don't really have access to that information directly. However, there are some resources that you could tap into. So here are some resources to get you started. And I would recommend whatever data you think you have or whatever questions you have, I would recommend to just get started and start collecting data on your users, okay? So first of all, there's industry research. All right, so for example, our company uses Gartner, and Gartner provides a lot of reports that describe the situation in different markets. Another thing would be this free reports circulating online that industry specific reports that some companies have graciously shared with us. So I would look at those as well. Another one is this best kept secret of the localization industry. No wonder, because it's the World Fact Book from CIA. So this resource is amazing. If you Google World Fact Book CIA, you would go to this page where you can actually select by country or select your country and learn a lot of things about it. So they will have the geography of the country, they will have the information on the people, they will have the distribution of languages in the country by percent of population that speak that languages. They will talk about currency, they will describe national holidays, they will just go into the regions per country. So this is a really helpful resource. And what I like the most about it is that you can download the data. So you can download it into a CSV. And if you run some type of analytics in your company, you can link that CSV file to analytics, and you can actually automate your international expansion dashboard with that. So this is really helpful because it has a lot of information and it's easily downloadable. So this is great. And then finally, there are research companies that, or analytics companies that focus specifically on international. At Box, we use Common Sense Advisory. You have to pay them to get research, but if you don't want to pay them right away, you can also go to their blog session, and that section will actually have a lot of information already that can get you started or can get your thought process going.
Okay. And when you as an organization were compiling your research for where to expand into next, didn't you as Box use the CSA? Didn't you heavily rely on this study or some studies from them?
Yes, so there is a really helpful study, and so I don't want to lie to everyone, so I won't name the study because I don't remember the exact name, but there is a great study on the metrics that you can look at that you can factor into your international expansion decision. So I went through that study, and for me, apart from all the metrics, I really like the motivational message at the end where they encourage you to start with the little data you have. And so that really motivated me to start researching this because there's a lot that goes into this into building a model for international strategy, and it may seem a little intimidating, but resources like this will help you start. And another type of a resource would be your language service provider. So you can actually ask them because they may have information on on some of the data points for you to go global. Christine, did you want to cover some of the information that an LSP can provide to their client?
Absolutely, and I think this is fascinating so far because it really shows on your end that you've done all of your due diligence when looking at which markets to expand into next. But yeah, Vistatec or any of your companies' chosen LSPs, our particular localization solutions and technologies help our customers achieve globalization excellence. So, we provide translation services and a bunch of consulting work that's wrapped around our reputation of excellence and history that's combined with our leading position in the industry. So when doing their due diligence and looking at which markets to expand into next, like you're saying, Hanna, it is helpful to talk with your LSP and understand really where they can provide value in helping you achieve your excellence for globalization, help you get your biggest ROI out of the project.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so these resources, all of these resources are very helpful, and they will help you build a list of countries by priority, and the list will tell you where to go next. So after you have that list, you're actually not done because you can optimize it. So think about a country like India. They have so many different languages. These regions are almost like their own countries. So when you are starting to think about India, you would have to divide the country by regions because you would have to target them separately. You can't just go into India generically because you would not know how to execute on that. So when you're building out a strategy, you may have to optimize like that. You may have to divide a country into regions, and then alternatively, you have a whole region of the world with multiple countries that you can tap all together. So For example, if you want to optimize for Latin American countries, but you don't really have the resources to localize into each of the regional variants, then you can look at them as a region. And as long as you support their individual currency, you can support one variant of the language and kind of get by for some time. So you can get started like that. Alternatively, you have the Eurozone, where the same currency is supported. So you may prefer to look at that as one region and as one of the items on your list, just because they have the united currency.
Ooh, there's an echo. Are you still on the Vistatec slide?
Yes, yes. So yeah, I will keep going. All right, and so another point that I wanted to make today was, when you already have customers, what do you do next? Okay, so this will seem very obvious to you once we go over it, but a lot of companies make this mistake. All right, so first of all, you need to really understand your customer journey. You can start with really high level. Okay, so users who may have a problem, this is your total addressable market. Then they start searching, so there are fewer of them who will start to actually actively search to solve the problem, and then fewer of them will discover your product, and then even fewer of them will start using it, and then some people will need support, and then some will churn, and some will expand. Okay, so for each of these steps in the customer journey, there is either a person or a team that's responsible for that. So you need to really understand well who's responsible for what, and most importantly, what assets do customers face at every step of their journey. So this is a really important point, because once you understand what assets people face, then you can start tracking them. So let's say you're looking at the searching or discovery piece of the journey. You can track what kind of keywords people use to get to your site. Where did you sell? Or what kind of ads were the most popular, and in what regions were they popular? Okay, for product, you can track how many users you have in what regions and how engaged they are. On the website, it's the number of visitors and maybe click-through rates and the number or percentage of people who use their own currency versus the generic US dollar currency, and so on. So once you track these assets, you will already start getting really helpful information about your users, okay? But the important point is to try not to bake within your own data. So a lot of times, people would ask themselves, what language should I add on my product? And the answer for them would be, let me look at the product data and see from which countries people are coming to use the product. And that's fair enough. If you don't support any languages, you can see that some people are coming from Germany or Spain, and then you can start supporting their language, okay? But on the other hand, you're not really optimizing for the future visitors that will come to your product. And perhaps you're even blocking the people from using your product, even though they have visited the marketing site or another endpoint, and they're ready to use it, but then they're blocked because you're not supporting their product. So how do you know who are these future visitors? So instead of looking at your own data, you need to get data upstream. Seems pretty obvious, right? So when you ask yourself a question of what language to add on products, you should be looking at your marketing side data, or you should be looking at the sales team data and the regions that they're targeting next, okay? So data needs to flow downstream. If you're a marketing person and you have information about marketing site visits, please pass that on to your product counterparts. Alternatively, if you're on product, go take your data and build a dashboard with it and give the dashboard to your support team, because that will be the most helpful. If they want to build documentation, they should not look at what kind of complaints they're getting today, because people may be blocked in using the support tools that they have because they're not supporting their language. Okay? So the points that we covered today is, first, you need to really understand what your addressable market is. You need to look at the different factors and prioritize it by countries, and then maybe optimize. And then finally, look for data upstream, because if you bake in your own data, you may not be optimizing for the future, and you may be losing some customers. So that's all from me. Simon, do you want to start us off with Q&A?
I did have one question. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yes, Hannah, what do you? Sorry, is there an echo on my line?
It's just a little bit.
Okay, I'll just ask my one question and then I'll hand off to Simon.
Okay.
What do you do when budgets are tight?
Right. So the whole point of this expansion exercise is to have a prioritized list of countries. So once you get information about all of these countries, and it may be information on the language population, their eGDP, for example, the penetration of, for us, is the penetration of cloud services in that country. You can then compare these numbers, or you can make a formula out of these numbers, and that formula will give you a scoring for each country or region, or you can do it by language. And that way you have a prioritized list, and you can go and just target them one by one.
Okay, thanks very much indeed. Okay, we have a number of questions here. I'm just going to put the first one through to Hanna, and it's a little bit related to what you're talking about, the optimizing by regions. And the question is, at Box, or in your experience, do you find that the process when you're investigating the addressable market and expanding internationally, do you find the process has changed at all with specific regions or parts of the world, or do you have, no, this is the way we do it, this is the process, and it's the same regardless of what level of detail you go down to when you're optimizing by region?
Yeah, so we're growing pretty fast as a company, so the process has changed. I wouldn't even call it a specific process, because we don't have a run book. So what we do is that we have a list of regions that are top priorities for our countries, and this list comes from our executives. So these regions are the regions where we are already having offices, or we are having huge volumes of sales. So these regions you can't do, can't mess with them, because they're top priority. And it does make sense, because when you actually score them within that model that I explained, then they would be top at the top. So these are the regions with the most opportunity. These are the regions where we have the operational strength. But then for us, what has changed is that we're selling a lot online. So now we have access to virtually any country, okay? And then we have different teams working on, or different teams whose responsibilities include international. So the way that we're built internally is that we have this marketing team, we would have an online sales team, would have product team, support team. So what has changed for us is that because we don't have this centralized globalization function, we have to work together. So it's not a process really. It's the mindset where everyone has to be really collaborative, because if we don't work together, we don't achieve anything. If I add something on products, if I add a language for India on products, and then we don't support it on the marketing side and we don't support their currency, then I'm going to fail. So we have to be this virtual team and work together. So that's what has changed. And before we would just target these top strategic countries, and now we are looking at more and in a more holistic way.
Thank you. A very comprehensive answer there. Thank you for the detail. We have a question from Robert, and it's about, have you defined the strategy and the difference between your administrator-facing software and your end-user software?
Okay, that's a great question. So we are a company that focuses on enterprise, and administrators are normally our buyers and decision makers, and our users are their end users. So because administrators are interconnected with their users, and we're also trying to democratize our product a lot to make it easier for everyone to collaborate, including the administrator. This is one, we see it as one product. So we're not going to split it into two and treat admins as, you know, as superior or not superior users. The way that we're looking at the product is one whole product. So whatever we do for admins, we do it for users, and we don't really differentiate. However, there are some requirements that I want to say it's not admin requirements, but more country requirements. So some countries are more strict with their privacy policy. Some companies are strict in terms of where they want to store their data. Okay, and this may seem like an admin requirement. End user doesn't really care where their data is stored, right? Not necessarily. Do they care? So we do have this very specific features that we do by country or regions, like box zones, or like we do have compliance with certain regulations in certain countries, so we can sell there. So I would say that's the only differentiator. And I wouldn't even call it admin versus end user. It's more per region, and it's there because it's inherent in selling enterprise software.
Thank you, Hanna. Robert, I hope that is a good answer to your question. Another question from Erica, and you touched earlier when Kristen was talking about obviously Vistatec services, and Erica would like to know some of how do you decide which LSP is right for you, because obviously it's a part of the international expansion strategy. So what type of things are you looking for in an LSP? Mm-hmm.
Yes, so as you can see, we do a lot of planning on our own, but what we're look for in an LSP is that they can execute very well. So we're looking for somebody who's technology driven, who is innovative in the technology that they use internally, and also who are really very kind of common sense, who have common sense project managers, because a lot of times we have to release something really quickly, and you know, we need project managers support with that. So that's another criterion. And then finally, we want somebody who is as international driven as we are. So we look for somebody who is very proactive in giving us advice if we're doing something wrong. So
Okay.
I would say these are the three criteria. I wouldn't necessarily say that they're different between different companies, but we actually at Vox we really focus on collaboration a lot, and we really care what kind of people work with us. So if you're, this innovative, technology-driven LSP, and you have great people, then there's a good opportunity to work with us.
Thank you, Hannah. I have another question here, just in terms of the overall research. Obviously, you've been involved in this area, and is there any sort of things that you've got wrong that you could share with us, or is there anything that you found works particularly well, if that's easier, or any tips, particularly when it comes to things like limited research available to you?
Yeah, I mean, certainly things go wrong, and there, sometimes you find gaps in internal data that you have to fix before proceeding. Or sometimes what I found for myself is that I made this giant-looking spreadsheet with all of the data, but then I really thought about it, and turns out that I only needed, 2 or 3 items from that spreadsheet, or 2 or 3 data points. So my advice would be go and collect as much data as possible, but also don't overcomplicate it, because if you have a really complicated model, that means you haven't really thought about what's really important, what are the really important criteria for your company. And then another pitfall with a very overly complicated model is that it's just really hard to maintain, and people want to understand it. People understand simple things, and if you really know what your company needs, it's 2 or 3 things really. So yeah, that's my that's my retrospective on that research.
Thank you. And we've one last question, which is a couple of questions wrapped up in one, actually, and it relates to what you're just talking about in terms of data, Hannah. And the question is from Robert again, so thank you, Robert. The question is that, assuming that you're using data to measure the adoption of localized languages and their usage, has this influenced your decision on where you go next? And do you add that market opportunity knowledge plus data in those related markets to build a better picture on the level of success that you might achieve? So maybe you could just talk to that for a moment.
Yes. So we track where our users come from. We track them by country. We track them by language. We track their so we try to track as much as possible. We analyze some of our core flows to see what user behavior was for those based on their region. So we track a lot of things, and it's once you even start tracking really simple things like just split your users by country and language, and you will already see some interesting trends. But so recently at Women Localization, I've given a short lightning talk about how we used engagement to see if adding a language actually impacts anything. So how, as a language professional, that people in other countries expect to see that language, but then your management doesn't necessarily agree with that before they see data. So when we add a language, we track it really heavily to see what kind of impact that had on our user base. And since we've done it for a few languages already, we can kind of predict how their engagement may grow. We also do, we look at the data from other teams. So we get the data on the projected opportunity in terms of how much we can make if we add that language or if we attract those users. So this, when you use this data, it really does help build your case for adding a language. And hopefully you're not, you're basing this case on the international strategy and you see that that's the language that you need to be adding next. But then you do deeper research and you will look at how many people are from that country are already using your product. Are they engaged with the product, or do they seem under-engaged? That means that maybe they're not using it in their language. With enterprise software, it's a lot of times it's just given to the employees, and the admin would speak English, so the admin is fine, but then the rest of the end users won't speak English, but they have to use this software. So they will still use it, so you'll see some level of engagement. But when you add a language, you will see that that engagement will grow, because we have given them a chance to really understand what that blue button says that they keep clicking to upload a file. All right, so yeah, we track a lot of things and we use it heavily to see what kind of impact a language or a feature even will have, and then it's really easy to present your case to add a language at the company level. So I hope that answers the question.
Thank you very much indeed, Hannah. That brings us to the end of the Q&A section, and we had some great questions there and some really great answers, so I hope that was useful. If you have asked a question and we haven't been able to answer it, we will get back to everybody after the webinar. In the interests of getting in touch, on the screen obviously there's been displayed there both Hannah and Kristen's contact details. I'm sure they'll be delighted to hear from you to find out more things about Box and of course about Vistatec. We'd like to thank you very much indeed for joining us today. We hope you've enjoyed the webinar. As we said at the very start, the webinar has been recorded and you will receive a copy of that recording in your inbox shortly. So all I'd like to do is to thank everybody for joining and to give a special thank you to Kristen Hansen and also to Hannah and Box for being part of today. So thank you very much indeed, guys, and thank you for everyone for attending.
Thank you.